typically say we'd rather have a lower monthly payment. And I always just simply say, like, there's no right or wrong answer to this. I just always like to ask that question because a lot of buyers do get very hung up on price. So if in your minds, you know, you've been searching for homes between 700 and 800, and I'm running numbers on every property, and I send a house to you that's listed at 825 or 850. I don't want you to see it and automatically think like, whoa, that's too high. I just want you to know that everything I'm sending you is going to be within your comfort zone for monthly payment and total out-of-pocket costs. That way, up front, I'm setting that expectation to them that they don't need to let the purchase price scare them. I also do throw out there that, you know, depending on the areas that you're looking in, things like that, like you can find a house that's listed at, in some cases, 900,000 and have a lower payment than another house that's listed at 825 because of the taxes, HOA fees, things like that, right? So sometimes a higher price actually yields a lower payment. And then I was just marked down for myself, like what their loan program is, how much, you know, what percentage they're planning on putting down. And then I always ask them, how much total cash are you comfortable parting with towards the purchase? Including your down payment and closing costs. Because a lot of people, you know, 20% of 800 but they're not factoring in the closing costs. So I always make sure, you know, a lot of buyers will say, oh, well, we're comfortable with 250 down. And I'm like, great, so is that 250 down payment or 250 total out of pocket? Because you will have closing costs. And then I always just confirm, you know, I say, great, and do you currently have access to these funds, right? Because sometimes people are like, oh, well, no, I'm getting them as a gift, I don't have them yet. Or, no, I have a house in Italy that, you know, is going to settlement in 2 months. You know, like I just like to make sure that, that they have these funds now. And then, again, I have these questions on here, but I typically always know that yes, they've already met with a lender, and then I make sure I write down their lender. So after this, I move into their like motivation and time frame. And you know, when would you ideally like to be in your new home? Is it, you know, some people are on a real time constraint, like we need to be in by the end of the summer for X reason, or our lease is up, you know, August 1st, so we need to be in something before then. Other people, it is just whenever we find the right home. And if a buyer doesn't give me any sort of indication, I'll always say like, okay, so if there's nothing that's pressing, like, do you have any sort of goal, like in your mind, ideally you'd love to be in by the holidays, or you'd love to be in within the next 2 years before your kids start kindergarten. Like I do always like to dig deeper to get a little bit more of an understanding from them. And then after that, I always ask them if we found the absolute perfect home for you in the next 30 days. Is that something you'd be excited about? Or would you feel like, oh, yikes, like that's a little bit too soon, honestly? Because some people are like, oh yeah, no, like we're excited. We want to get into our new home. And then you ask them this question and they're like, well, I don't know. Like, I really just don't think that. I feel like that would make us nervous, right? Where some people are like, yeah, oh my gosh, if we found the perfect house tomorrow, we would offer. So you're just gauging the motivation with like, how quickly are they likely to offer if we do find the perfect home? Because some people find the perfect home within the first week and they don't want to offer just because they just started looking. So I feel like that question kind of helps to gauge personality as well. And then I always like to ask, is there anyone else involved in your buying decision, right? Because like sometimes there's, oh, well, you know, my ex-wife is, we're still super close and, you know, she's gifted me some money towards the purchase, so we want, you know, she will be involved. Or my parents will probably be at a lot of showings with us because they're gifting us funds or, whatever the situation may be. And then, lifestyle, so I always move into, because at this point, I may or may not know them at all. So I want to make sure I kind of am like also getting to know them on a personal level. So I always ask who all will be living in the home they purchase. Typically, they'll disclose if they have kids. I always ask if they have pets. Sometimes people are their parents are moving in with them, whatever it may be. And then whenever if they do have pets, I always ask, like what kind of pets do you have? What are their names? Just to kind of like build some rapport a little bit. And then a lot of times, especially if it's dogs or something like that, like they'll immediately be like, so yes, like having a yard is like super important to us. So this is starting to get them excited. Now we're going to move into talking about their home criteria. So I always start with location, and I would say the location part and the financial part probably take up the most time of the consult, like section wise, because that first page usually takes me about, 25 minutes to like really get their idea on comfort zone and exactly where. And because through that conversation, I'm setting expectations as well. Location, sometimes it's super cut and dry. So I always just start by saying, so great, tell me about your ideal location. Where do you want to be? They may start listing off towns. I find it, so when I'm having this conversation with them, I'm literally picturing myself in Bright, in the MLS, and creating their search on the back end. Like, I need to be crystal clear on what all areas they will consider, and if there are any areas within those areas that they want to exclude as well. Our school's important. I always throw that in there when we're talking about, like, if they're like, oh, Downingtown, Westchester, Exton, and naming off a handful of towns, a lot of times I'll like kind of cut them off and be like, do you feel like our school's important to you, and do you feel like you're kind of basing your search around the school district? Because sometimes that's the easiest way to cover the most amount of ground as well when you're doing a search. Or is it that schools aren't important and you want to be within a certain drive time or a max commute to your parents' house or your children's houses or your job? And I will, if they want to be within 30 minutes of their job, I will literally ask them what the address of their job is, so that I can then do a drive time search in the MLS for them. So sometimes I just need, like, for my own sanity, I always have to be so crystal clear on what all areas they will consider. Because sometimes if they say like, oh, within 45 minutes of work, and I work at the courthouse in Westchester, that is a huge area. And I know immediately that there are probably going to be like 300 results that come up in their search. So then I want to narrow it down and exclude any areas that they may not be willing to consider. Like, great, so are there any areas within this area that you want to exclude? And then sometimes they'll list off different towns or different townships. Like, I've had people say, we want to exclude Norristown. So I'm like, do you want to exclude like Norristown School District? Do you want to exclude Norristown address? Do you want to exclude Norristown Borough? Like, where? Let's be very, very clear on this. And then we move into their home search criteria. So this is more so the fun part. So tell me about what type of home you're looking for. Are you solely looking for a detached home? Would you consider townhomes, twins? Again, I always make sure, like, I'm envisioning myself creating their search, right? Because townhomes, or I should say like condos, right? Condo, if someone's like, we don't want a condo, I'll make sure when you say a condo, are you more so talking about like a style of home, which is like one level, a flat, or are you talking about condo ownership, right? Because they're two different things. One, my first house was a condo, but it was a 3-story townhome. I just only owned the walls in. So again, I like to dig deeper on every single aspect. I've had people say like, we don't want a townhome, but we would consider a twin because it's both are like end units. And so then I'm like, okay, great. Would you consider an end unit townhome if we found one, or do you just want something if it's only 2 attached? And then overall space. So I always go and I just simply say, tell me about how much overall space you're looking for in your home, number of bedrooms, bathrooms, and then they'll typically start talking like, oh, well, has to have, 4 bedrooms and 2.5 baths. People will say that off the bat very frequently. Okay, great. So, and keeping in mind now, I already know what their price range is and where they're looking. So I'm already like envisioning which homes are going to be available for them. So if I know that they are a little bit like maybe unrealistic, like if I know that they're only willing to consider a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath, or 550 or 600,000 in downtown of Westchester schools, I'm digging deeper when they say this. Like, okay, great. So when you say 4 bedrooms, like say they have 1 child or no children, I'll be like, okay, so do we need 4 bedrooms, or like, are we going to be using these as offices, or would you potentially consider 3 bedrooms? If there was also space that you could use as an office. And does it have to be a designated office space? Or would you be willing to use like a formal living room as an office space, or a basement as an office space? So making sure that I am opening our options up as much as possible, and also kind of like setting the stage for them. Whenever there's a number of baths, 4 beds, 2 baths, I always will say, great, and is that 2 full baths, or would you consider 1.5? And then I always ask for them any idea on square footage, just to gauge if they have an idea at all. They may not, like depending on if this is the first home that they're buying, they may not have any clue how much a certain amount of square footage looks like and feels like. And granted, it does feel very different based on the layout of the home. And then, so once I am very clear on bedrooms, bathrooms, like I also will dig deeper if they're like, has to have 2.5 baths. And I'm like, okay, great. So if everything else is perfect and it has 2 full baths, but there's no powder room, you do not want me to send it to you, is that right? And they might be like, oh, well, no, you could send it, because I'm like, do you just want to make sure that there's a bathroom like on the main level for guests to use, basically, even if that is a full bathroom as well, but there's no separate powder room. And then I always ask, this is one of my favorite questions in the whole consult, if you had the option, would you prefer something that is larger and more outdated or smaller and more updated? So if they say they're looking for 2,500 square feet, around that size, I would say, you know, for example, would you prefer like 2,300 square feet, completely updated cosmetically? Or would you prefer something that's like 3,000 square feet and completely original cosmetically, like livable, but not, you know, original kitchen, original bathrooms, not necessarily a project that needs to be tackled right away. But this question really helps me to gauge when I'm sending them homes, which ones are they most likely going to lean towards? Like, do they care more about everything looks beautiful right now, even if it's sacrificing square footage, or would they rather buy something that can be a long-term investment for them that they can make improvements over the years? And this also leads me into like the next section where a lot of times they're like, you know, no, oh my gosh, we would absolutely prefer something more outdated. We would love to do our own projects. We know that we're not going to find anything that's already updated to our liking. It just helps me to get to know them more. And then I was asked, do you have any preference for when the house was built? Again, gives me an idea on, do they prefer your, you know, your newer construction or your 90s and later colonial, or do they prefer your, you know, something that maybe is older and more charming, has more character? Some people will be like, we do not want one of those cookie cutter homes where all the homes are very close. And then, so as I'm going through here, this is the last page. So as I'm going through, I'm flipping to the last page as they answer pretty much every question. And I'm writing down their absolute must-haves and their preferences. So when they say the number of bedrooms and bathrooms, and then we come to an agreement on like the very minimum, like, okay, they would consider three bedrooms as long as I had an office space. I am then flipping to the back page and writing 3+ bedrooms as long as it has office space, and 2+ full bathrooms as long as there is like an appropriate guest bathroom for people to use. Like without having to go upstairs or downstairs. So, and then also, as they're saying, random things that are their preferences, like we do not like those cookie cutter homes. I'm flipping to the back page and writing under preferences. Do not like cookie cutter homes, like tight neighborhoods, that kind of thing. And then, so, and some people have no preference. They just are like, no, it doesn't matter either way. We kind of like both. And then, so I have like a lot of these questions are kind of filler questions. Like I don't necessarily always ask every single question on here. But some buyers give a lot of information when you're asking questions, and some buyers literally give me nothing. So it's like helping me to try to understand what they're looking for. Because like if I just asked above and they said they would prefer something that's larger and more outdated, and they would love to like redo kitchens and bathrooms and flooring and all of this, then like right below here, I don't necessarily need to say, do you want something in move-in condition? Are you willing to do some work? With the exception of if there's a difference between being willing to do work and make cosmetic improvements versus a house that needs work to be moving. Like work needs to be done before being able to move in, because you can have an outdated home that's very much so move-in ready and livable, or you can have a home that is in disrepair and you have to renovate before moving in comfortably. So under that question, I have three options, like major work, they're willing to do kitchen, bathroom renovations, tear down walls, additions, all of that. Some people are like, we would be okay with a project, but we don't want like to have to redo the whole house. So like we'd love to redo like just the kitchen if everything else looks good, or like the master bath or something like that. And then some people are like, no, we don't want to do any work. And if they say that, I'll always say like, okay, when you say you don't want to do any work, does that mean you don't want to be doing like kitchens and bathrooms and tearing down walls? But for example, would you be willing to do like flooring and paint, that kind of thing, right? Because like we're setting, again, for asking the question, I'm hearing where their mindset is at, and two, it kind of helps me to set the expectation that like a majority of homes are probably going to need some sort of work. Do you have any preferences when it comes to an HOA or condo association? So I worded that way to make sure that they know the difference between the two as well. Like if they are curious, like a lot of people will be like, oh, like what's the difference? But then I can explain that condo association is when you own the walls in essentially. So there's typically a higher fee, but more is covered. Your homeowner's insurance is then lower, yada yada. Some people are, and absolutely not, won't even consider it, don't even send it to me. And other people prefer to have it, right? Because they prefer to have less maintenance and or the amenities. And then when it comes, if they're considering single family homes, I always ask if there are any style of homes that they either prefer or dislike, right? Like some people are like, we do not want a contemporary style or mid-century modern home, or we do not want a split level, or we do not want a bi-level, or we would love something that is incredibly unique, like a converted church or a barn dominium, you know. So this helps me to learn what their like style is. Some people just love your like standard colonial traditional. And I do always ask them as well to, if there are any homes that they have seen online, whether or not they've already sold, that they like love, to shoot them over to me, because normally they have like favorites stored in their Zillow or Realtor.com. Because that way it just helps me to see an example or a couple of examples of exactly what they love. So it's setting us both up for success. And then I do always ask, like, if you could choose a specific like exterior look that you love. Like, do you feel like you love vinyl siding, or do you love stone or brick, or you hate vinyl siding, or whatever it is? Again, these are just like me trying to make sure by the end of the call I have a good list of, like, I know what their absolute must-haves are, but I also have a good long list of what their preferences are, good, like their likes and dislikes. And then, so I always say, do you prefer a more open floor plan? Because some people love, like, oh yes, kitchen has to be open to the family room. Some people prefer something that is more set, like has more separation. Recently I've had a ton of people be like, I like some openness, but I don't want everything to be open. Like some of these new construction homes, you like open the front door and you're staring at the kitchen, and the whole entire first floor is just wide open. And then any preferences at all for the bedrooms or bathrooms that you can think of? They're like, sometimes they're just like, no. I'm like, okay, great. Like, first of all, when you say, so the stuff that I have in parentheses is like here is more notes for myself to like ask if I need to pry more, right? So if they said it has to have at least 2 full bathrooms, in this instance, I will ask, does it have to have a master suite? like, would you consider a home that has 2 full baths, but neither of the bedrooms have their own ensuite? And so then I make sure to add that to either a must-have or a preference for them. A lot of people will be like, oh, like, yes, definitely has to have it, or depending on price range, they might say, no, like, I guess it wouldn't be an absolute deal breaker, but as long as there was like a close by bathroom that maybe we could convert to be a master bath. And then I also have here like first floor master, or like, would they consider a first floor master? Sometimes if it's people that have young children, they want to make sure all the bedrooms are on the same floor. So again, these are just like reminders for me to ask them if I feel like it's necessary to ask. If I'm talking to a buyer that's looking for, 200,000, I'm not gonna be asking, do you need a walk-in closet and things like that, because I don't want to set the wrong expectation. And then what are your likes and dislikes for the kitchen? So I always say to them, first I listen to them. A lot of times it's, we want to make sure we would love gas cooking, or we would love an island. I always ask, if you guys were to build a home or completely gut a kitchen, like, do you have any idea what color cabinets and countertops you do and things like that? Just to, again, this way, like, if they're like, I love a white kitchen, or I hate a white kitchen, I put it under their preferences list so that I know when the perfect home comes up for them and it meets all of their must-haves and also meets a ton of their preferences, I know that like they're gonna love this one. But if maybe I love like a white kitchen, but maybe they hate a white kitchen. So I'm sending them a house and I'm like, oh, I bet they would love this. And they're like, the first thing they say is like, oh no, actually we hate white kitchens. I'm like, oh, no, I know, right? So I do just try to like dig deeper to know what they love. Some people are like, oh, we would love a painted cabinet. I get all the time. We just want, like modern looking, but that's so different for so many people. Like, and then is a formal dining room important to you? I would say half of the time, yes. Like we do entertain. I have my grandmother's table and lunch or buffet, and like we love hosting for the holidays, and we do want it to be like its own separate room. And then a ton of people are like, no, as long as we have like a decent size eat-in kitchen space. Again, because I want to fill my priority or preferences list, I have just a lot of filler questions in here. Do you want a fireplace? Sometimes it's like almost a deal breaker for them, sometimes it's not. And then any other rooms that you need or want. So, for example, would you say like, is a basement a must-have for you? Do you have to have a basement? Not that many homes on slabs, but depending on the style, like, is having a basement of some sort a must-have? Is having an office space of some sort a must-have? What are you looking for in terms of a garage? Has to have an attached 2-car garage. Okay, great. So if the garage was converted to living space and there's room on the property for a garage, but there's not currently a garage, do you want me to send it to you, or like it has to have existing 2-car garage? Because like a lot of people honestly don't even use a garage. So I try to dig deeper with every question to, especially based on their price range and their comfort zone. Because again, I usually have kind of an idea of what our options are going to be. So if they are somewhat unrealistic, like by the end of the call, I will also pull up on my computer. Like I'll share it with them on Zoom, but I'll just pull it up on my end. And because I'd rather have an expectations conversation on the Zoom call with them face to face, than getting off, doing my search, not being able to get them back on the phone, like easily, that kind of thing, and having to be like the bearer of bad news that we don't really have many options here. So if I'm sensing that they're pretty unrealistic through this, I will try to get them to adjust their expectations. And or will be like, send me something that you guys have found that you love, and then I'll run numbers for them to be like, so here your payment would be like $800 higher than you said you're comfortable with, right? Because sometimes people are either willing to revise their expectations and, have lesser criteria, and sometimes they're not, but they're willing to stretch to go higher. So it typically has to be one of those. And then, is there any lot size that's too large or too small? So, has to at least be an acre, and it has to be in a neighborhood. There's not a whole lot of those around here. Neighborhoods where you have a minimum of an acre. So a lot of times they'll be like, okay, would you potentially consider something that's like on a half an acre, but it's all of the homes are pretty far spread and like it's backing to open space, right? Like, what's the reason that you want this acreage? A lot of times they'll be like, we just don't want to be like that close to our neighbors, or we want to make sure that we can have a swing set and a pool. So a lot of times they are willing to revise that lot size criteria, knowing that it also depends on the style of the lot, right? Like, or how the house is situated on the lot. And then as far as the type of lot that they're looking for, like, would you guys consider something that's more unique, like potentially sloped or wooded, or are you looking for, a flat, clear lot? Because I feel like maybe just for me in the very beginning, if I would see a home that like was on like a big cliff and mostly wooded, I would just, in my mind, I'd be like, there's no way they would like this, right? But maybe they would actually prefer that and they love it. You just never know. So I've over the years added lots of questions to this. Things that have come up like while I'm doing research and when I'm thinking like, oh, should I send this to them? I don't know if they would like this. Let me just ask. And then any preference for when it comes to public water and sewer versus on-site well and septic. Like if someone's like, we want a minimum of an acre, but it has to be public utilities. Well, our options are pretty much slim to none. Like there might be like 3 neighborhoods. I think you just had one, David, that was on a great lot size, but public utilities, and it's so rare. A lot of times it's also like a teaching moment. A lot of buyers, especially first time home buyers, will be like, I just don't know enough about it. Like, so it gives me the opportunity to explain. And then, what are your thoughts on a pool? Some people love a pool. Some people, it's an absolute deal breaker. They won't even consider a house with a pool. They're nervous about a pool. They don't want the maintenance of it. Some people, it's like almost a must-have and would be the biggest possible bonus if it already has a pool. So, I have clients right now that are under contract, and that wasn't required, that the lot had to have the ability to have a pool somewhere, like some sort of flat space where that they can make a lot have a pool. And then, I always ask them at the end, what is your favorite room in the house? Like when a new listing comes online, or when I'm sending you a property, what is like when you're scrolling through the photos, what are you most excited to see? Like a lot of people say kitchen, a lot of people say the property, the yard, the family room, the master suite. And so again, it just helps me to gauge like what rooms are most important to them. A lot of people are like, honestly, the family room's our favorite room. Like we need a big family room. So without asking that question, sometimes they wouldn't have necessarily shared that with me. So after this, I then go through my entire list of must-haves and preferences with them. So I'll say, okay, great. So, the absolute must-haves I have for you, and I'll start on the front page, like I don't put their financials or their location onto the back page. I just leave those there because those are what they are. I don't need to transfer them to the must-haves. So I'll flip back to the front and I'll be like, great, so, absolute max payment, X, absolute max amount out of pocket is X. I'm sending you homes in downtown Westchester, Great Valley, and Phoenixville School District. And then, has to be a single family home, has to at least have 3 bedrooms, 2 full bathrooms, has to have at least a 1-car garage, has to have a basement, has to have at least a half an acre, has to, whatever. I'm going through all of those and then I'm going through preferences. So, has to have some sort of, or, we would love to have a fireplace. We would love to have hard floors at the main level. We would love to have the kitchen open to the family room. We would love to have painted or white kitchen cabinets. I'm going through all these things, like the tidbits that they have given me over the call that I've written down. And then once I have gone through all of those things, I will say, I'll circle back and say, I'll look at like this section right here. Right at the top of the must-have list, right? There we are. And I'll say, is there anything else that you guys can think of that I have not asked you yet? And then I'll start on my list here. So I'll be like, for example, like, is central air a must? Or would you potentially consider something if it had mini splits, or knowing that it could be added? Oh, my brother-in-law's HVAC, so like we would love to have central air, but like not an absolute deal breaker. Or a lot of times it would really depend on the price and if we would have funds to be able to install it. Like I grew up with window units and I really don't want to deal with window units. What about, does it have to be in a neighborhood? Or like, would you prefer something in a neighborhood? Or would you prefer something, typically by this point in the call, they've given me tidbits earlier on. So I have a general idea of like, if they want something more unique and private, or they want something more cookie cutter in a neighborhood, if that makes sense. But I always ask, like, would you say it has to be in a neighborhood or like a safely walkable street? Or would you potentially consider something that is, off of potentially a busier road, as long as it was like across from a neighborhood or across from a park or something like that. And then outdoor living space, some people are like, our dream is to have like a big deck and a walkout basement. So like rather than walking out to a ground level and a patio, we would love to have a yard that like slopes downwards. And again, just questions that allow me to dig a little bit deeper and find out like what is most important to them. And then so if they say a garage, because some people I go through these and they're like, that would be fine, but not necessarily. Oh, that would be fine, but not necessary. And like by the end of the call, I'm like, well, we have on here has to have 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. I'm like, what do you like? Like, what would you prefer? So, okay, if a garage is not a must-have, would you say a driveway is a must-have? Or would you potentially consider off-street or on-street parking? And they're like, yeah, that would be fine. Or if they're like, oh no, like it has to have a driveway, I'll be like, okay, so would you consider it if it was on a street that was like there was no driveway, but you could easily find parking. Like, for example, downtown borough, lots of single family homes on the street, so there's plenty of space between homes and therefore plenty of street parking. Especially because a lot of people there do have driveways and do have garages. So if this one doesn't specifically have a driveway and a garage, but it's easy to park on the street, would you consider that? Laundry location. I always ask, again, depending on price, like if the price is 200, I'm not saying like, does it have to have second floor laundry? Like, because I don't want to set that expectation. I might say, okay, I'm assuming you would be okay with laundry in the basement, yes, right? And then sometimes if I don't feel like I've had enough preferences on their list either, I will then just like whip things out of my head, kind of like based on our conversation, and also, what about like flooring type? Like, do you find yourself, like, do you like carpet? Do you prefer hardwood? I love this question. Some people will be like, I love tile. And I'm like, well, that will give us some options that no one else wants. So perfect. But I will just try to pull anything out of my head if I like they're being too easy almost, because I want to make sure I have a good idea of what they like and don't like. And some people are just very easy and they're like, honestly, it doesn't matter. I could go with either. Okay, cool, wonderful. We'll see how it goes when I start sending stuff. And then again, once I've done all of that, I ask them again, is there anything else you can think of that I have not asked you yet? And then I'll usually ask them, like, do you guys have any questions for me? Because a lot of times throughout the consult, like, I'll be able to set expectations on the current market, right? Like if we're talking about well and septic, or if stucco comes up when we're talking about exterior homes, like, oh, well, we definitely don't want stucco. Like, I will throw in there that those are typically inspections that we would want to elect. Yes, we are in a market right now where there are buyers that are willing to waive all contingencies, and certain homes are better contenders, I like to call it, for waiving inspections than others. But so sometimes things like that come up, but like if I have not talked with, again, like some people just don't talk very much, so I feel like I'm trying. And then I do like to kind of at least at the end of the call, like just set the stage for the market if they're not asking me questions about it. Just because I want, I'll say like, I'm sure you've heard, or maybe you haven't, that like we are, very much so in still a seller's market for the most part in this area. There certainly are homes that are overpriced, that don't show well, that are sitting, more room for negotiation, that kind of thing. But the best homes in general, still, if they're priced well and they show well, are selling very quickly, typically with multiple offers, or buyers are waiving contingencies, waiving inspections, waiving appraisals, like, and depending on how it's going, like, I certainly don't want to scare these people away. So, I'll just say, but, we will cross that bridge when we get there. Like, if we're in a situation and you absolutely love a house and you have to have it, based on that specific situation, like, we'll go through what it makes most sense to do, and, how we can make your offer strong. And then, like, we don't always have to waive inspections, or we could maybe do a walking talk and different things like that. And then, I always like to find out, like, what typically works best for them for showings. So, are there certain days of week, times of day that typically work best for you guys for showings? Some people are like, oh, well, I work from home a couple of days, so I have a little more flexibility than her. And, or like, my work schedule, like, I literally can't even be on my phone throughout the day, or I'm in surgery often. So, like, really, my shifts are different, and evenings, weekends, only, that kind of thing. It just helps me gauge when they're going to be available. And then, so at the end, I just say, great, I will work on this list of homes. I'll get it over to you typically, within the next day or two at the latest. And I will send them to you via email. I will then start a group text with the three of us, and then like I go over, like I always say like that's typically the best way to get me. So in your portal, you can favorite homes, you can discard them, you can put notes on them. I always let them know if they add notes to homes. It does not always notify me. So like if you want to see a home, make sure you shoot me a text. I always tell them like if I send you a home that I think that you'll love, I will always text you right away because I don't want to just be sending them homes via email and not also communicating with them. Like I want to be like, hey, just sent you a home I think you would love. Let me know what you think because I want their feedback. Or just send you a group of homes. Let me know your thoughts. Like, and if there are any that you want to see. And then I do also, typically at this point, I have an idea if they would consider new construction or not. So I do have that at the bottom as well, just to like make sure we cross that bridge. Some people are like, absolutely not, we don't want anything to do with new construction, some people prefer it, so. But yeah. Pretty cut and dry. It's nice to just be able to follow it all along. Does anybody have any questions?
You have a PSA, you are allowed to talk now.
I don't know if that was on the purpose of this, but there was one thing that I was wondering if you could go over, is how you discuss your commission.
For listings?
No, this
Or
was
for buyers.
This is,
Yeah.
well, this was for buyers, right? So, yeah,
Yeah.
do that, because that's like
Honestly, I don't.
a lot more, you don't talk about it.
I really don't. I have not been in a situation where, like, so on our buyer agency contract. I don't know who's listening to this, but I'm saying. Our buyer agency, I do things my own way, like, I put 3% on it, but I don't ever charge the buyer commission. If I'm accepting less, like I personally don't. I know some agents recently have been successful in doing that. I feel like I make it up on the listing side because I charge 6% on all of my listings. So for that reason, like we'll see often like when we're winning awards, our GCI will be like number 2 for GCI, but like number 6 for units. And we're like, how's that correlate? And it's probably because we get like on all of our listings, we're getting 3%. Buyers are typically always been, in my experience, are typically always made by the seller. Like we had one deal that and this was right when they made this change, that the seller was offering only 2%. And I think this is back when like still, I mean, I don't usually reach out to the agents anymore before showing homes. So when this first thing happened, I like didn't know what to expect. So I was asking every agent before I scheduled a showing what the co-op was. And this one was 2%. And it's on the market for like 2 weeks. And my thought was probably because the house wasn't like absolutely amazing, but also because they were only offering 2%. So that's, reducing obviously the buyer's purchasing power. So ultimately, we negotiated a 1% credit for commission, and we got 3% anyways. But I mean, I've sold $1 million new construction homes, and they pay you $10,000. So I don't know. My mindset is like, and I don't know if it's right or wrong, but like I run a referral-based business, so I just don't. It's very rare that I'm in a situation where I would be expected to take less than 2.5, and I'm happy to take 2.5 if it means that my clients are having their offer accepted on a home that they love, rather than asking for them to pay the difference of 3. So I don't bring it up. And I also don't bring it up on listings unless they ask me. Do you
So
bring
do
it
you
up in fire
just-
council?
Well, because we've been taught that it is, we need to make it clear that commissions are negotiable. So it's hard to say, oh, I charge this percent if it's negotiable. So how?
So I am not sending a buyer agency until I'm writing an offer for someone. So like, it's not even, it doesn't come up. And I could be sending a buyer agency, I do always send a buyer agency still at 3%. Like, I don't revise it to reflect the amount that I'm being paid.
So you.
I discuss commissions being negotiable to sellers if they're asking about commissions.
I think people get hung up on this,
Yeah.
and I have not, in all this time since the new rule, I never ever tell a person, like in a buyer consultation, I'm gonna be charging you 3%, and I've never ever called an agent from day one to say, how much commission are you paying me? I'm taking people and I'm showing them the home. And there's not one case that I've had where a person has said, I'm not paying you any commission. And I think a lot of agents, last year, 70% of agents did not earn an income. And it's because they hung up on how much am I going to get paid? I'm going to phone the other agent quickly and ask, I've got to sign this form. How much am I going to ask the person for? I write up the form and I say 3%. And I'm also not chasing the person for the extra 0.5% or whatever, because I'm making up for it in honesty,
Yeah.
for example.
So you don't do the pre-call, we're taught to pre-call and say, what is just before we break.
Oh, no, I'm not asking. I'm not gonna be saying to my client, they're only paying 1.5%. I'm not gonna go and show you that house. I'm gonna show them that house and I'm gonna get the commission that I want. Because I'm gonna write up the offer with what I'm asking.
Right, that's
You
what I
have
do.
to take control of the situation. We control the market doesn't control us. That's my belief. So, there's no ways I'm gonna get hung up on a rate. I'm not selling a rate, I'm not buying or selling for a client for the rate for the commission. I'm focused on showing that client a home, helping them buy a home, or helping them sell a home. And let me tell you, you command the price. And that's all in their head. A lot of people are saying, oh, I'm gonna first find out how much it is and then I'm not gonna check. At that rate, you'll never ever show a home because you have the fear of this document. Don't let this document confuse what you're really there to do. That's my.
Yeah, for me, I don't like to complicate things, like, I don't want to stress a buyer out by giving them more information than they need to know, like, if I'm in a situation. If I'm in a situation where, so, same thing, I don't ever ask anymore before showing the home. I have found that in the case that someone's offering less than 2.5, that they typically will tell you upfront. Like, I have had one agent that was like, it was a 1.5 house, and he was like, hey, just an FYI, they're paying 2% on this. So actually, I didn't factor that into the offer, and I told my clients at that point, and they were fine with it. Like, it was just, we literally bumped up the purchase price so that they weren't coming out of pocket with additional money. And they still felt like they were getting a good deal. But I don't know, I sometimes feel like too much information stresses people out, and I also don't create more work for myself. And in the beginning, I was asking because I wanted to make sure that I knew, like, how has this changed the market, or has it at all? And then within like 2 months, I was like, literally, this hasn't changed anything. Like, sellers pretty much are still fully paying commission. And then when I'm writing an offer, I just put it in there. And multiple offer or whatever, they'll typically come back to me and be like, hey, like, you look pretty good. But just as an FYI, I saw in there that you have 3% and they're offering 2.5. And I'm like, well, no problem, I'll change it. But yeah.
I love that you said that. And Janine, same thing, I love that you guys are saying.
We're getting hung up on something that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Totally understand. If you go back, so I've gone back and I'll look at all the sales that have happened in the last 6 months, last year, since the 17th of August 2024. Go back and see how many did not pay the right commission. And it's not a situation where people will say, oh, in this deal, you're not gonna get paid commission. If they want the deal to happen, they're gonna pay the commission. And you have to just ask for it. If they don't wanna give it to you, they're gonna say, we're not gonna give it to you. And then you cross that bridge when you get to it. I know, are you prepared to go? If you're not prepared to go, then you stick to your guns. Okay, you're gonna get paid.
Yeah.
I can get one deal where I get to beg for 0.5% more, or whatever. So,
Yeah.
you can ask, and it's even been before the rule came into play, that was there already. Commissions were negotiable.
Yeah.
People, and there's a guy that works for Keller Williams. There's a huge billboard that says, I list your home for 2.5%. I was the buyer in one of these transactions, and this was before 2024. And what happened was, he said, oh, by the way, the commission is $1. And I said, doesn't affect me, I'm showing the house. Showed the home, put in an offer, got 2.5%. I phoned him, I said, by the way, I'm submitting an offer. How much commission are you getting on the deal? He said 2.5. I'm not gonna embarrass him or insult him. I put in my offer at 2.5, the same commission.
You should have said 2.5 plus $1.
And I got the deal. So if I'd gone in at 3%, maybe I would have upset him. But I said, look, I've submitted the offer, it's at the same price that you are at. Here's the offer, subject to your client payment. And there was a form at that time that you could complete. So it happened. We paid the commission, we did the deal. Nobody was upset that the buyer didn't even know that my commission was going to be $1.
Sure. Right.
And you can look him up, his name is Jeffrey Poe. He works for Keller Williams. He works for Keller Williams in Collegeville, and he was recruited numerous times to the Tri-County. He actually shops your deal, but he's got a document signed by the client that says, you can tell them how much you're getting and if there's a buyer agency commission. He does it all the time. So they know this person's money at this rate, and they're not charging, and they are charging. So,
Well, thank you for all of that.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for coming. Just remember, Chesco has their lunch and learn. So if you want to grab your lunch, you can come back in, and they're gonna do a lunch and learn with me at their runners. Thank you so much, Leana.
Please, thank you, Leana.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Okay, cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about title commitments. You know, what I'd really like to go over is, one, you know, what is the commitment? Why is it important for you guys? What should you be looking for in the commitment? And how can you use the commitment to get to a smoother closing with no surprise? Okay. But first, I just want to go through a little bit of background on how we make the title commitment. You know, once you place the order with the title company, what do we do on our end to prepare that commitment? Well, generally, we're going to start with the tax parcel number. Okay, we're going to take the tax parcel number. We're going to look up the tax info on that property. We might have the names of the owners. You know, if you're on the seller side and you know the sellers, we'll know who they are. And then we're going to go and we're going to search the public records. We're going to find the owner's deed, and we're going to chain it back, deed to deed to deed, to get a chain of title and make sure that we have a clear source of title that we're starting from. We're also going to take the owner's names, and we're going to take the names of the other people in the chain of title, and we're going to run searches on them for any liens that might affect the real estate. We're going to find any mortgages that they have. We're gonna find judgments that are against them. We might find if they are in bankruptcy, or if they owe real estate taxes, or maybe they have municipal liens against the property that are gonna need to be addressed. And we're gonna take all of that information and we're gonna use that to create a title. We're also gonna pull the legal description of the property. That's the boundary lines of the piece of real estate that your sellers own. And we're gonna take a look at that and probably plot it out and make sure that it closes, that it actually produces a box and not just like a legally line or something. So that's what goes into us making the title commitment. It's a lot of searching of the public records and looking for any matters that are going to affect the title. Matters that are going to permanently affect the title, like an easement or something, maybe a power company has power lines going over the backyard. And also matters that would cause an immediate problem if we miss them. Like a mortgage, we gotta pay that off, the judgment, we gotta get that clear. So what exactly is the title commitment? The title commitment is the commitment from the title company to ensure the title to that property. If all the requirements in Schedule B1 commitment are satisfied, the requirements are like, we need to get paid premium, we need to do the search, we need to get a deed, all of that stuff. We need to pay off the mortgages, the judgments. So it's our commitment to ensure if all those requirements get satisfied, and then we're going to ensure subject to the exceptions in Schedule B2. And we're going to go into all that in a little bit more detail. But for your purposes, you can really look at the title commitment as sort of a roadmap to get to the closing and to figure out what are all the things you're going to have to do, at least from a title perspective, in order to get to the closing table and get to a point where we can settle on that transaction and ensure the title. Now, the title commitment, it's not a guarantee of the record, meaning it's not a title search in the strictest sense. The title company, we do a title search and we review the title search and we use that to create the title commitment. But the title commitment itself is not a search. Every single thing that we find in the chain of title doesn't make its way into the title commitment because not everything in the search actually affects the title. At the end of the day, we're looking at what do we need to do to ensure the title to this property. We could search all the way back to William Penn if we wanted to, and we're going to find a lot of stuff that is no longer relevant. We're going to find stuff that maybe affected a parcel back when it was, a 1,000-acre piece of farmland, and it's just not relevant anymore. So the title commitment isn't an exhaustive summary of the title back to forever. It's just a roadmap to see, okay, these are the issues that we really need to be concerned about. These are the issues that we think still affect the title today, and that we're either going to need to clear or we're going to need to raise exceptions for. So let's move on a little bit. So let's just talk about the different parts of the title commitment real quick. The first thing you're going to see when you open up the commitment will be a lot of line print. And you can, turn the pages and get to Schedule A, and that's really where the interesting stuff starts. Schedule A is going to set out who is the owner of the property. Whose names did we find on the current deed when we searched the title? Who's the buyer in the transaction? Who's the lender in the transaction? What's the sale price? How much are we going to be insuring the title for? What's that liability amount on the title policy going to be? And what's the loan amount going to be? You're also going to see usually the property address and the legal description in Schedule A as well. The legal description identifying the property that we're insuring. It's always a good idea to take a look at Schedule A and make sure you don't see any surprises there. I mean, you're either going to be representing the buyer or the seller. You know, take a look at the names, make sure we got everybody. Make sure the lender, you know, we have the right lender. Make sure the amounts make sense. The more sets of eyes that we have looking at these things, the better. And you guys are closer to the customers ultimately than the title insurance companies. Okay, so we talked a little bit about Schedule B1 already, and we're going to go into that in more detail. B1 are all the requirements that we need to satisfy in order to insure. B2 are matters that affect the title, but they're not going to go away. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail as we go through. So here's just a really simple example of Schedule A. You're going to see the file number, who's the issuing office. You'll see like Chesco's information in there. The date of the commitment. The date of the commitment, that's not today's date. It's not the date the commitment got released. It's generally the date that we were able to search the records through. What happens is that, you know, the Recorder of Deeds office records deeds, mortgages, you know, all the recorded documents. And they're never current as of today. You know, there's always a lag time. So it takes some time for matters to hit the record. So that commitment date is just what date were we able to search the title through. Then you're going to see the identifying information for the parties in the deal, the buyer, the lender. What kind of title are we insuring? You know, 99.9% of the time, it's going to say fee simple. The only time it's not going to say fee simple is if maybe you're insuring a leasehold. That would still be fee simple, actually. Yeah, that would still be fee simple if you're insuring condo. A lease that would be a different thing. Yeah, if you were doing a lease, then you would expect that to say lease. And that's something to watch out for. You know, if you've got an unusual deal, like a leasehold interest, or maybe we're insuring, who knows, like an easement or an option purchase, something to watch out for to make sure that we've got the correct estate set up on Schedule A. And then we've got the name of the seller, the person who title is vested in. And next we've got the legal descriptions. You know, the legal description, these can look complicated at first glance. You know, there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of compass bearings, directions. But if you break these down line by line, they're really not that complicated. I mean, take a look at the second paragraph. Situated in White Marsh Township, Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. That's easy enough. Described according to a plan, that might be a recorded plan. That might be a document that you got in the title search package. And you can take a look at that plan. And down at the end, you're going to see it's being lot number 4 and lot number 3 on that plan. You could look at that plan and say, well, there's lot 4, there's lot 3. Is that the property that we went and looked at? You know, when you met with the sellers or when you took the buyers there for the open house? Now, in the middle here, you're going to see the real meat of the legal description, you know, beginning at a point, blah, blah, blah. These are really not that hard to figure out. I mean, you're going to see it's beginning at a point on a certain side of a certain street, and it might start at an intersection, or it might start at some distance away from an intersection. All that is to say, you could look at this legal description, and you could have Google Maps open in front of you, and you could actually get a sense, hey, wait, which property is this? Is this the property that I think it is? So that's the legal description. You know, it's always a good idea to take a look at that. You don't need to get out a protractor or a calculator or anything. Just take a look at it and make sure if you're not seeing anything crazy. You know, if the property is supposed to be in Chester County and it says Montgomery County, you know you've got a problem. So that's Schedule A in the legal description. Schedule B, Part 1. These are all the requirements that we need to go through in order to ensure the title. And a lot of these requirements are going to be the same in every single commitment that you look at, especially these beginning ones. Let's take a look at a few of them. The proposed insured must notify the company of the name of any party not referred to in this commitment. That's like if you have a buyer and maybe you think you're dealing with, with one person, and maybe you find out later that they're going to have their spouse in the deed too, or maybe they're buying it with a parent. That's something that the title company is going to need to know. Hopefully, when the order gets placed, they know who all are going to be entitled. But whenever you find that out, that's something you got to let the title company know, because they might need to do additional searches. At the very least, they're going to want to update the title commitment to make sure it's accurate. Next, we've got the requirements for the deed and for the mortgage, if there is one. And that just sets out who's the deed coming from, who's it going to, the buyer and the seller. Same with the mortgage. Let's see, powers of attorney. This is always one to think about. It's in every single title commitment. But you'd be surprised at how many times we get to a closing and a party who we weren't expecting walks in the door and they've got a power of attorney for the owner. The title company's got to review that. They've got to make sure that it's a valid power of attorney. They've got to make sure that it can get recorded. And so as soon as you find out that one of the parties in the deal wants to use a power of attorney, get a copy of it and send it to the title company so that we can take a look at it in advance and just give you the okay that it's good to go. And then, there's no delay and you're not in the worst case scenario, which is that you show up at the power of attorney and there's a problem with it. It can't be recorded, or maybe it's not notarized properly, something like that. That's the worst case. Because then you're at the table and you can't, you might not even be able to close at that point. So always try to get that stuff approved in advance. Let's move on to some other requirements that we see pretty typically. Number 12 there is for divorce. Divorce proceedings are something that we need to take a look at on the seller side. Let's say you have one party in title and they're married and they're going through divorce. We might need to look at the marital settlement agreement to see, is this property discussed? Do we need that non-titled spouse to sign? In Pennsylvania, we don't usually need a spouse who isn't entitled to sign anything, like a waiver or the deed. The only exception is if there's divorce. And this requirement is really important to keep in mind because when we search the title, we don't always find a divorce because a divorce can get filed anywhere. And we're only searching the title in the county where the land is. So if you find out that there are divorce proceedings, you're going to want to let the title company know so that we can figure out what do you need to do to move forward. Okay, we've got some more boilerplate here about social security numbers we need for the 1099. We also need those for child support searches. Bankruptcy, that's another one. If you've got a party in bankruptcy, we search for bankruptcies, but bankruptcies are another one where they can get filed anywhere. So if you know about one, let us know so that we can review and make sure that we've got everything that we need on the bankruptcy end to get to the closing. So the big items that are going to be different on every commitment you see are mortgages, judgments. That's just going to show the owner's mortgage. That's who we need to get the payoff statement from, and any judgments that might be against them. Sometimes we see I guess what I would really tell you to look for when you're looking at the mortgages is look for any mortgages that don't make sense. You know, in this case, we have a fairly recent mortgage and there's only one of them. That's simple enough. I mean, that's more than likely the current owner's mortgage that they're making payments on every month, and we're gonna need a payoff for it. But imagine if you saw a mortgage on there for a similar amount from 10 years earlier. That might not be a live mortgage anymore. I mean, they might have paid that off when they refinance, and that's something that, you know, they're gonna want to look into, like what happened with that? Do we have proof that it was paid off? Don't just assume that, you know, it's gonna be easy, I guess, to get every payoff for every mortgage. Because if you see a really old mortgage on there, that's something that we're gonna want to start looking at as soon as we can to try to figure out what happened with that mortgage. Is it something we can take payoff for? Do we need to track down who the lender is? Do we need to look at, you know, an old settlement statement or something? Can we figure out whether that got paid off years ago? Always take a look at the mortgages and look for any that you think don't make sense. Any mortgages that that your seller probably doesn't know about. They thought they paid it off years ago. Those are the ones you really want to watch out for and talk to the title company about early.
It's very valid. I've had that happen to me a couple of times where I had the person that paid off their mortgage in 1930 on that home.
Wow.
And they couldn't find that mortgage company, but it was on the title commitment. And it took quite a while to actually work out that they had paid it. That company was dissolved, that mortgage company was dissolved.
Mm-hmm.
So it does take a long time to get to the bottom of some of those.
Yeah. And it's really a case by case basis. You know, a lot of times if you have a really old mortgage, you can tell the title company and they'll talk to one of their underwriters and we'll say, this mortgage is so old, it matured 30 years ago. We're not worried about it. We're going to insure over it because it's just that old and that low of a risk. So it's not always it's not always going to be a lot of work to get something like that cleared, but it's always something that you want to get out in front of and, you know, start working on it as soon as we can. Judgments are always something to take note of. You know, anytime I see a judgment, I'm thinking, first off, is this against the property owner? Or maybe it's against somebody with a similar name, you know? Is this something that they know about? And what are they, you know, what are we gonna do about that? You know, we are probably gonna need to get a payoff for it. But, you know, certain judgments are easier than others to get payoffs for. There's a big difference between, you know, a judgment for a past due credit card and a federal tax lien like this one. I mean, the IRS, it always takes some time to get a payoff from the IRS. So that's another thing to always talk to the property owner about and the title company about so that we can get those resolved. Now, here are some requirements that you're not going to see on every title commitment. You're only going to see these when we have a corporation or an LLC or a partnership in title. You know, say you have a seller who's a developer maybe, or they are an investor. We're going to raise requirements so that we can review their corporate documents and figure out who is authorized to sign for that company, who's authorized to sign the deed. So when you see these requirements and you've got the corporation title, you know you're going to have a conversation with the seller about getting a copy of their operating agreement, getting a copy of their certificate of formation, and getting that stuff off to the title company to review it and make sure that we have the right person signing the deed. That's always something that the title company is thinking about, who's authorized to sign. It's easy when it's a human being in title because that person is going to sign. And if they've passed away, then the executor of your estate will sign. But with a corporation, we don't know until we review their documents and see who owns that company. Same goes for a trust. When you've got the trust and title, you're going to see trust requirements like this one, calling for a copy of the trust agreement so that we can review it and figure out, who are the trustees of this trust? Do they have the power to mortgage it? Do they have the power to sell it? What's the deal exactly? So when you've got a trust and title, when you see that on the title commitment, you've got to have a conversation with the client about getting a copy of that document and getting it in front of the title company so they can review it and make sure it's okay. Okay, so that's Schedule B1. Those are the requirements, the typical things that we've got to get through in order to close. Schedule B2 is a little bit different in that these are matters that affect the title, but they're not matters that we're going to clear 99% of the time. So these are things like an easement on the land is probably the most common one. Like I said, the power lines, utility companies have to run their utilities over people's properties or out front, maybe in the street. And they have easements that say, we can run our power lines here. We have a right to maintain. That's something that's there. It's recorded in the land records. It affects the title, but it's not going to go away. And so we raise those as exceptions in Schedule B2 to say, you've got to know about these things. They affect your interest in the land. But it's not something that we're going to clear in order to ensure. It's just something that we're going to take an exception for. As in, we're not going to ensure that your title is free and clear of this thing that affects the property. So that's probably the most common specific exception. But we always have a few general exceptions that you're going to see on every single commitment. The first one, we call it the gap exception. Because like I said in the beginning, there's always a gap between today's date and the date that the recorder of deeds has recorded all the documents through. So when we go to closing, there are documents sitting in the recorder's inbox, or maybe judgments that have been filed but haven't yet, hit the records yet. And they could hit at any time, and they could hit in between the date that we close and the date that we're able to record the deed. And that's one of the biggest reasons why we have title insurance, is to protect against that gap risk. You can have a seller in a transaction, sign a deed, sit down at the closing table, take the money, and then record a mortgage before the deed actually gets recorded. That's something that title insurance covers. And that's the very first exception, but that exception always gets removed from the title insurance policy. So if you walk away with a marked up commitment, that first one is one you're always going to see removed. The next one is rights or claims of parties in possession. That would be, think a tenant under a lease. That's a party in possession of the land. And it isn't shown by the public records because that lease isn't reported. So you have a tenant living at that property. They have a right to be there. They've got a written lease. But the title company doesn't know they're there because nothing's recorded in the land records that we tell the title company that. So that's an exception that, if the property's going from homeowner to homeowner and there are no tenants there, that's an exception that can get removed. But if the property is being sold by an investor and maybe it's rented out, then that exception is probably going to remain in the policy. And that's a question, always to talk to the property owner about. Are there any leases? Who's actually living at this property if it's not the owner? Or who's using it if it's a business? Next one is the mechanics lien exception. This is for any work on the property that's been done and that hasn't been paid for. This is only gonna get removed from an owner's policy if there hasn't been any work done in the last 6 months. But it can almost always get removed from a loan policy because purchase money lenders have priority over mechanics. So we generally take that out from the loan policy. From the owner's policy, we really can only remove it in cases where like we know that there just hasn't been any work done. Next, we've got the survey exception that generally remains because not that many buyers, it doesn't mean you get surveys. And the only way to remove that is if we have a survey. And then we've got the exception for real estate taxes. And then after that, you'll see other specific exceptions. You know, we talked about easements. If the property's in a condo, you'll see an exception for the condo declaration. It's like the terms and conditions that govern that condominium. You'll see exceptions for maybe like agreements and things that might be in place, say with the township. There might be agreements over, over roads or over like stormwater facilities if you're in a big development, things like that. It's always a good idea to take a look at those documents and see, is there anything in here that's going to affect how my buyer wants to use this property. Once you've looked at one utility easement, you've pretty much seen them all. But sometimes you'll find something weird in Schedule B, and sometimes you might know about something that your buyer wants to do to the property, and you might find a restriction or something in Schedule B that says, you can't have a shed of over this size, or if you're in a condo or a PUD, you can't paint your door, a wacky color or something like that. You may know about those things just from your conversation with your clients that we don't know. And so it's never a bad idea to take a look at these documents and just, give them a skim and see, is there anything in here that, that my buyer is going to be concerned about. So we've really gone through most of the clearance stuff already in terms of Schedule B1, so I don't want to repeat all that and put you guys to sleep. I'll just point out reviewing for accuracy. Really important. The more eyes that we have on the title commitment, the better. The title company has looked at it, the title examiner has looked at it. Any errors that popped up or any omissions, maybe the title company didn't know everybody who was going to be buying that property. It can be something as simple as that. Just take a look at it and make sure it looks right. Make sure you don't see anything that you know is not correct. So that's all I've got about title commitments, but I'm happy to answer any questions or talk a little bit about the claims process. Anything, any questions that you guys have, any deals you're working on right now with title issues?
I have one. I'm representing the seller,
Mm-hmm.
and he purchased a home prior to getting married.
Mm-hmm.
The wife is not on the mortgage. They didn't want her on the agreement of sale or anything like that. They just sold it.
Mm-hmm.
And the title company that is representing the buyer is using Old Republic to do the title commitment,
Mm-hmm.
and they're demanding that the wife be added to the deed. And I'm asking them, why does she have to be added to the deed? She can be signing a waiver, spousal waiver,
Sure.
or she can, do an adjoiner at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've done a number of these, and they just won't budge. They want a social security number, which I'm happy to give them, but I don't want to. He doesn't want to. She doesn't need to be on the deed. So I just don't understand. I'll ask the title person to explain. She says, Old Republic wanted, and that's like a final. But, am I being difficult or
No.
is this,
The only time we would ask for a spouse who is not entitled to join the deed or sign a waiver, is if the two are getting divorced. Maybe if they're separated, they might want to, yeah.
we're gonna do another property deal with them and they're gonna be buying together. So they're not separated or anything like that, it's just, he bought it when he was single,
Yeah.
I helped him buy it.
Mhm.
A nice, they got married a year ago now, they're going to sell the place, they've sold the place,
Yeah,
we're going to closing next month, but they're insisting on opening on the deed. And we just don't understand why it's,
in Pennsylvania, when you've got one spouse in title, they own that property 100%. And the spouse doesn't have any rights in that property unless the only exception is if they're in a divorce. Because if they're in a divorce, the court can look at it and the court can divide the property between the two. But that's only during the time period when divorce proceedings are active. You know, if they filed for divorce, yeah, we would ask for the spouse to join. But unless that's happened, I really don't think they have a basis to.
so how am I gonna get through to the title company that this is how it should be, because I'm telling you, this is how it is in Pennsylvania. The title Old Republic I checked is in Illinois, the headquarters are in Illinois.
Yeah,
Sometimes
they-
transactions are affected by that, if they're out of state, they have different rules.
Mhm.
But this one, the rules in Illinois are exactly the same as in,
So the property is in Pennsylvania.
the property's in Pennsylvania, just
Okay.
sold it, it's in Chatsworth, so.
I would point out that they're not getting divorced, they're not separating. You can tell them what you just told me, that you're helping them buy the next place together. And they'll put a statement in the owner's affidavit to that effect. And ask them to run it by their underwriter. Cause yeah, I really don't see the basis for that. I think if they get to somebody at Old Republic who's local in Pennsylvania, I have to think they'll change their mind.
Well, I was thinking I could ask Chesco to find Old Republic and just clarify for me, which
Yeah,
they've agreed that they would do. So it's just, I've been in this argument now for the last 2 weeks with the title company.
yeah, that doesn't sound right.
And it's a Pennsylvania, it's a Philadelphia title company, which makes me even more dubious because there's a lot of fraud in Philadelphia. So,
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, that's strange. Anybody else, any other questions, concerns? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
thanks.
Do we use Old Republic? Does Chesco use Old Republic now?
No, it's Fedoroff.
But, yeah, I've never seen Old Republic on there. But I went back and I looked at Old Republic. Maybe they were just old in their thinking. I thought maybe the state had something to do with it, sometimes it happens.
Yes, no, I would tell them like them to go back to the prayer.
Yeah.
And say,
Oh my gosh, Chesco just got my back.
maybe we'll have them write a letter.
Yeah.
They're married, and then we can work with something like that.
Yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, live and learn, every day is something new.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
So, give me a shot,
Yeah.
you know?
You do education.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not that today.
On Monday, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long day.
Well, it's an advertisement for how.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
I love getting this stuff. So I.
Tuesday, maybe other day. I'll just have a look on my calendar and do it on Tuesday. I want to do some. Oh, yeah. So 26. Yeah, we'll be talking about the she had an option one of the presentation on yeah. So this is so from 10 o'clock onwards. But is there something over here in Newtown? Yeah, what about training? Are you going to training next Wednesday? Wednesdays. It's Wednesday afternoon after the training. Yeah. 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 Wednesday afternoon. What's in there? One of the closing on Thursday. Just the other time on Wednesday. Or like bring it on. So no, this. That's another charges on Wednesday, so in the morning I'll be there training. And then I'll get in between. So 12. Okay, let me know. Let me know. And then we'll use this. It's gonna be an extended. And we always start at 10, so before we never see it.